hard won. And so the question is, what impact could a default have on the markets and on your bottom line? I want to bring in Joe Fichera, CEO of Sabre Partners, to discuss some of the details of that. Joe, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So what is the biggest impact then could we feel Thursday morning if in fact a deal is not reached?
Well, if we actually go past that line and we don't pay our debts on time, now there's still games that they're talking about, playing about prioritizing some debts, like the interest and principal on Treasury securities and not paying somebody else. That'll be a big question. But if we go past and actually default on any of our obligations, we'll see a dramatic, probably rise in interest rates, the cost of credit, which will make for people who already own bonds, those bonds will be worth less. And those people who borrow will probably have to pay more money to borrow. And everything else that is based upon U.S. Treasuries and upon the safe haven of the United States government's pledge of full faith and credit will sort of go up and ripple through the economy and through the world, because we get a lot of investors outside of the United States coming in because they believe that this is the safest place to put their money. If we actually cross that line, they're no longer going to believe that it's the safest place. They may look for other alternatives, and we'll be in a very uncharted territory that we really don't want to be in. I think everyone says they don't want to be in, and so that's why there's sort of hope that this gamesmanship up until the deadline will get a resolution. But if we cross the line, we're in a brave new world.
Joe, let me ask you about this, because I think you bring up a great point, the fact that this is something that has not happened with this kind of situation before, not only with a budget debate happening that forced the government shutdown, but obviously also working up against this debt ceiling deadline. And as we've been talking about some of the consequences, the potential fallout from this on the individual basis, then what is the most overlooked consequence of this, do you think, that isn't being discussed right now?
Well, I think it's on the value of everyone else who has investments for example, or people who have to borrow, like state and local governments. Their costs are low right now because all interest rates are low. And if their costs go up, state and local governments, that means higher taxes are going to be in place in order to pay the service for state and local governments as well. So a lot of people haven't looked at the financings and the interconnectedness to taxpayers, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level. We talk a lot about the international effects, and that is important as well. But a lot of people haven't looked at what the ripple effect through the economy down to the average person actually is.
So going on that then, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said, in fact, that a manufactured crisis would actually be worse than the crisis we experienced in 2008. Is it a fair comparison?
It's pretty fair comparison because, at that point in 2008, many people, could not foresee the effects of what the interconnectedness of Lehman Brothers was to the rest of the economy, and sort of went through that bankruptcy night thinking that it would just be isolated to the financial sector. But then we found out the unexpected consequences, like that money market funds, which we all thought were safe and just like cash, suddenly froze because people can't have another run on the bank. Here in 2013, we're pretty well sure about some of what we've promised and how interconnected the U.S. Treasuries are to all sorts of other types of financing, other mortgages and 401ks and investments, banking and such. And so the fact that we would do this even after coming through that, and it would be something deliberate, and that is not something accidental, but something deliberate, will really shake investors' confidence in the United States.
There is some discussion that if, in fact, we don't raise the debt ceiling, the Treasury could technically keep funding everything essentially on a day-to-day basis. Is that an accounting move? Is that where is that confidence coming from?
No, that's sort of a shell game in terms of looking at some point. You don't have enough money. The reason why you have the debt ceiling is simply for what you've already promised to pay. and you are collecting cash and coming in from taxes on payrolls and other such inflows. But what will happen is that they will, in trying to move the shells around to pay some people and not pay others, somebody will, by the end, will run out of cash, and somebody isn't going to get paid. And we hear people say, oh, we can take care of the bond investors. We'll always pay principal and interest of the government debt, but that means we may not pay somebody else. We may not pay Social Security. We may not pay Medicaid. Somebody is not going to get paid. And in any one of those scenarios, it's a default.
Have there already been discussions then about prioritizing if in fact we do default and every bill cannot be met to its obligation?
Well, I think there's been discussion in the press and among the politicians about that. I haven't seen the Treasury Secretary or other people say that. I think people believe that the complexity of the federal payment system is not one like a normal household who just simply gets 5 or 10 bills coming in and can just then decide which ones to pay and who has to wait. But they have already used extraordinary means to sort of push off the day of reckoning this far, and I believe that the Treasury Secretary and even the Federal Reserve Chairman all believe that that can just go so far, and there is a line that you're going to cross where you're not going to have enough inflows to pay the outflows, to pay your already outstanding debts, your already committed promises.
Talk to me a little bit about the market's reaction on this, because obviously we saw some movement last week. It almost seemed on a minute-by-minute basis whenever any of the congressional leaders were holding a meeting, either among themselves or with the White House. And then, of course, the fruits of those meetings turned out to be nothing other than the fact that both sides seem to be digging their heels in a little bit deeper. But when you see how the markets closed today, the Dow up, is it a matter that investors just don't want to believe that this could happen, or has that ripple effect already played through the markets?
Well, remember, it's up only about 0.5%, which is not a lot. And there's been a lot of volatility back and forth over the past couple of weeks. I think most people think, all right, there's a certain amount of acceptance that these are games that are people going to play, and they'll finally do the right thing. And that we get moments of, as you say, of hope, in which it looks like they're going to get a deal, and then moments of despair, back and forth. Nobody's really willing to put a firm trade and a firm guess because it has been so uncertain at the time. But you will see that the way, for example, when back in 2008, when TARP was being discussed and people didn't know whether it would pass or not pass, the markets were jittery and such. But then when Congress actually did turn it down, the markets went down extraordinarily sharply. And then that could be the same thing here, where we're sort of in a narrow range of complacency and thinking that they'll do the right thing. But if we cross the line, like I say, and default, then all bets are sort of off, because that's so unprecedented in the history of the capital markets.
What would you advise your clients if, in fact, that we do go up against that 11th hour, and in fact Thursday does come around and there is no deal on the table? What kind of advice or what kind of suggestions would you make either to your own clients or the average American? Is there anything to do, either moving money into a bank account, trying to refinance?
Well, you can't do anything. The average person has very little that they can do to affect the outcomes. They've already have their investments and mortgages, and things take time. So we always will say, don't panic, don't be fearful. We'll try to have to see how it plays out to get to some stability, and then make either defensive moves or opportunistic moves. But we're still pretty much at the mercy of Washington right now, because there's no real strategy that you can play given the great uncertainty that's here.
All right, Joe Fichera, CEO of Sabre Partners. Joe, thank you for your time and your insight. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
We have a complete report on abcnews.com as we are now entering the 4th day of the government shutdown, and that debt ceiling deadline does loom this Thursday. For now, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York with this ABC News Digital Special Report.